the effect of dampening, if you will, any pushback or protest from workers. And we maintain that if we can abuse, if we allow the abuse of migrant workers or immigrant workers, then, you know, that's just a short distance from allowing abuse to happen to citizen workers. And the fact of the matter is that every worker in the United States is supposed to be covered by the same protections. And so that's why we sue them. This shows the backbreaking work that migrant workers do. This is a forestry worker. So a lot of that in the Southeast. They plant pine trees, and they might get paid maybe $20 a day for planting, I don't know, 300 trees, you know, little saplings, so that, you know, they can eventually be cut down and made into paper. So we issued a report called Close to Slavery, and gave that report to the Department of Labor and some congressional representatives with the idea of presenting our lawmakers with information about the abuse and with the hopes that they would stop it. But as you know, or as you should know, there was a lot of anti-immigrant legislation that was put forward the last couple of years in the aftermath of Arizona's SB 1070. Arizona's SB 1070 was an anti-immigrant law that was said to be kind of the most harsh in the nation. That was until Alabama came out with HB 56. And now, granted, I lived with HB 56, so I kind of know it, and I can say that, you know, it was awful. But some people may not know. So I want to share with you just a couple of the provisions that I think make the law so heinous. One of the provisions of HB 56 required teachers to ascertain the citizenship status of their students' parents. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled long ago that every child has a right to an education in the United States. And so the people who brought HB 56 into being knew that, and they were trying to find a way around it. So they felt like if they could ask the students to tell them about their parents' immigrant status, that would have the effect of scaring, frightening the children, and then the families would leave. HB 56, Alabama's anti-immigration law, by the legislature's own admission, was created to encourage people to, quote-unquote, self-deport. So legislators are quoted as saying that they wanted to affect every aspect of the immigrant's life and make life so miserable for them that they would leave. And they did. And okay, so why, you may say, I'm not an immigrant, why should that matter to me? Because these are people. These are people who are members of our community, and it's wrong to treat people this way. It's wrong to frighten children and ask them to give information about their parents and put them in the position to give information about their parents. It's wrong to separate out families in that way. Another provision of HB 56 made it criminal for anyone to give a ride to someone who I might suspect to be undocumented. So this brought the church and interfaith communities kind of, you know, on the side against HB 56, because this directly got in the way of their ministry. So churches and church groups were not allowed to pick up people who might be undocumented, or they should know to be undocumented, and give them a ride to church, or give them a ride to the food bank, or give them a ride to work. If you did and you were stopped, then you would get a ticket, and the undocumented person would be arrested and sent to detention. So those were a couple of the provisions. There were so many others, like you may be familiar with the whole concept of day laborers, so they said, okay, we're going to do something about that. So people can't stop and park their car for more than 10 minutes. Ridiculous things in that law. Thankfully, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on Arizona's SB 1070 and ruled major portions of that law unconstitutional. And then after the Supreme Court ruled on that, the U.S. federal court think it was the Fourth Circuit, ruled on HB 56 and deemed major parts of that law unconstitutional. There still are some parts of SB 1070 and Alabama's immigrant law that stand today, and that you may hear people refer to the Papers, Please provision, and that allows law enforcement to ask for people's proof of legal presence or documents. So if a law enforcement officer, highway patrol, whatever, state trooper pulls you over, they can ask you for your papers. And we're still fighting that in court because we maintain that that's racial profiling. We also put out a, we try not to sue everybody, you know, we try to like, we try to do some education, some not lobbying because we don't pay, but just some kind of education where, and shame people into doing the right thing, and giving out reports and trying to build coalitions against what's going on. Now, in Florida, you may have heard about, we just had success in this case, this was major. Now, this is another thing that just baffles me. States, like Alabama, in this case Florida, pass laws that they clearly know are unconstitutional. This law in Florida disallowed students whose parents were undocumented from attending college. Now, I said previously that the Supreme Court had ruled a long time ago that everyone has a right to education. Okay, but this is higher education, they say, and they don't have a right to that. Well, the students were born in the United States, so they're U.S. citizens. And so to tie their parents' citizenship status to their citizenship status and disallow them the opportunity to go to college and pay in-state tuition is ridiculous. And so we sued, and we won. And so now, but it should never have gone to court, never. These are U.S. citizen children. And these are the kinds of laws that are passed, and oftentimes, just regular citizens don't say anything about it. Why is that? So I asked you to think about that. If you've read about that, if you've heard about that in some way, is there something that you did, you said, you felt? Because somebody's child, some person, like this girl, were affected and weren't able to go to school because of this whole anti-immigrant thing we have going on right now. This is a picture of some kids in Foley, Alabama, who are members of the community. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I said that, you know, it's heartbreaking. HB 56 and anti-immigrant laws and anti-immigrant sentiment really do destroy people, families, and in this case, kids. At least we think that, okay, well, racism against black folks is all settled, and now we're all focused on Latinos. Not so. You may not recognize this man. His name is James Anderson. And he was murdered, brutally murdered, in Jackson, Mississippi last year. I'm going to play a clip of the video that was taken. There happened to be a video at a motel that was near where James Anderson was run over by a truck. And I show the clip because sometimes I tell this story about James Anderson and I can't believe that people never heard of it before. You can Google him and find out more about this story, but here's the clip from CNN. Do I need to do something? No. Okay, did you see that? You need to see it again? Okay, James Anderson was leaving a club, leaving a party, and these kids, and I say kids because they were 18, 19, 20 years old, lived in the suburbs of Jackson in a little town. And they had taken to coming to Jackson for the express purpose of beating up black people. Excuse me, they had done this before, but they had never murdered anyone. So Jackson, this particular location where Mr. Anderson was run down, is the first exit in Jackson that you could get off on and find some black people. They also talked about, or shared some, or displayed some animus against poor people. So it was black people and poor people that they had some disdain for, and would go, just like they party on their side of town, and get in their car and drive over to Jackson and beat up people. This particular night, they saw James Anderson walking down the street, and they did beat him up, and they took his wallet, and most of them, there were 2 or 3 cars. The 2 other cars left, and one car with the defendant, first name is Brandon, he was 18 at the time. He decided to come back, and he saw James Anderson, in his vision, and just ran over him in an SUV. Then kept driving, went to McDonald's and met his friends at McDonald's, and bragged about killing him. Yeah, I killed him. No remorse whatsoever. No shock from the friends. Everybody just proceeded eating their McDonald's and having a good old time. And then it was later discovered that this tape existed because the hotel next to where he was had a tape. And so it was all caught on tape. Now first, Brandon and his family and then the kids said, oh, no, it wasn't a hate crime, it wasn't, it was an accident. And then the truth came out. So three of the guys, including Brandon, pleaded guilty, and they've been since convicted. They're convicted on hate crime charges. And the thing, the Southern Poverty Law Center is suing in civil court for civil damages for James Anderson's family. But for me, the story is not only sad just about James Anderson, but for Brandon. This boy is 18 years old. Now James Anderson is dead, but he and his friends are going to spend the rest of their life in prison. He's 18 years old. It was interesting because they interviewed some of his classmates from high school. He had just graduated from high school. And in particular, they tried to find some black people that he knew. And they interviewed this one black friend. He's like, God, no, we were friends. I don't get it. So apparently he had friends who were black, and he hung out with black people, but he was also known to say kind of, derogatory things. Then it all came out that his family, he heard a lot from his family, his dad in particular, about black people. And so he ended up acting this out. And for me, that's the case with this James Anderson case. That was the case with the Jordan Groover case. That young people are often persuaded to do things and to feel certain ways based on what adults feed them. And so we're all responsible for that. We're all responsible for Brandon. And I try to when I talk to high school students about it, they're responsible too, because somebody had to notice that something was wrong with this boy. And nobody said anything, and nobody did anything. So, if you see a Brandon, I'm sorry, I cannot see it all. What does that say? Those are hate incidents that have happened in your area. So as I talk to you about personal responsibility and what Brandon did, and it's easy to say, oh, that happened in Jackson, Mississippi, or oh, that happened in Kentucky, that kind of thing doesn't happen in progressive Florida. They do. And recall that I said that hate incidents are precursors to hate crimes. So when hate incidents happen or occur, that's an opportunity to do something and to prevent hate crimes from happening. Next, Gary.
New Scout in Davis
Oh, okay. Those are just some examples of what's going on. I apologize, but typically I have my thing here, but I can't see. I can't see that far. Now, one of the things that we do at the Southern Poverty Law Center, I don't think I mentioned that there were 3 program strands now, but we still litigate. We still have the Civil Rights Law Firm. We have the Intelligence Project that tracks and monitors hate groups that I mentioned. But we also have a program or project called Teaching Tolerance. And Morris came up with this idea around teaching tolerance around 1991. And he did that because he felt bad about putting young people in prison for the rest of their lives, noticing that a lot of the perpetrators of hate crimes were young people. And so he thought, let's start something in the schools so that we can get to young people at an early age and teach them to appreciate and celebrate diversity before they become susceptible to messages of hate and intolerance. So we started this Teaching Tolerance program. And through this program, we publish a magazine like this one twice a year, and we send it out to every school in the country. And we have a website that has just a treasure trove of lessons about diversity and inclusion on every topic: race, anti-Semitism, gender, sexual orientation, everything. Every aspect of diversity is covered. What we want to do is provide educators, classroom teachers, and administrators with the tools they need to help students manage diversity and inclusion. Now, that is if the students are allowed to stay in school. And this brings it a little closer home for you all. Southern Poverty Law Center has a lawsuit pending right now against some municipalities in Florida for the it seems that African American students are tagged for discipline problems and thus kicked out of school at a much greater rate than their white peers. So what we're calling this is like the overcriminalization of African American youth, and because they're tagged as discipline problems and kicked out of the school, or the discipline that is meted out is far more harsh on African American students, we're saying that this is a civil rights issue, and it is. We call it the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline. Students who are kicked out of school are more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. And this happens not only in Florida, not only in Escambia County, but all over the country. African American students are disproportionately targeted for discipline and thus not allowed to be in school. And even if they're not kicked out of school permanently, if a child is suspended repeatedly, that affects their academic performance, of course. Then there's the whole notion of teachers, classroom teachers, and I used to be a classroom teachers and administrators who come with their preconceived notions that African American students are more prone to discipline problems, and that also affects academic achievement. So what we're trying to do on that level is we're trying to work with communities and try to get school districts to do the right thing, and we've had some tremendous success. We're doing that work not only in Florida, but all over the Southeast, in Mississippi and Alabama. But in Florida, in particular, you all are particularly hard on young people, not just black people, just young people in general. You tend to convict them and lock them up and put them away in private prisons. And you're paying quite a price for that. Not only are families broken up and kids' lives destroyed, and they'll end up criminals the rest of their lives, it's a lot more expensive to incarcerate children than it is to help them and their families. So I know that at the same time that we're engaged in some litigation against school systems and jails, also jails and prisons for holding young people or children in adult facilities when they should be in juvenile facilities. We're at the same time working with communities so that you can empower yourselves to fight against that. We're also working with communities to educate folks about the wrongheadedness and the inhumanity, really, of locking up children in adult prisons. It's wrong. I don't care what they did, really. But more often than not, kids who have committed really nonviolent, not murder, not rape, are housed in prisons with adults. You all have seen Locked Up or shows like it. Children are locked up with them. And you know what happens in prison. And that's wrong too, but that's another topic. I'm talking about kids who are subject now to adult abuse. So I want you to think about those things. Next time you read a news story, hear a news story about some kid that was tried as an adult. It's into adult prison, what that really means for that child. You all also have in Florida, and I know this is not your community, but you had that boy, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, who killed his step-sibling or something, who grew up in an abusive, neglectful home and ended up killing his younger sibling, and now he's facing murder charges. I think he was 11 or 12 or something at the time. Fortunately, the Supreme Court ruled recently that juveniles cannot be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, because that's essentially a death sentence. Because research has showed for some time, and people are now just beginning to pay attention, that children are developmentally can't make the same decisions that adults, don't have the same kind of process, don't have the same kind of understanding of consequences. Even though you think they do, they know right from wrong, yes. But an 11-year-old does not realize that doing something is going to land them in prison the rest of their life, and then nor that should they be locked away for the rest of their lives. That's just my personal opinion. That sometimes something can be done. So I really encourage you, I implore you to pay attention to these stories and pay attention to the elected officials, the people that you elect, who talk about what they're going to do relative to crime. That's an aside. Sorry, this is my personal thing. Kids that are in school, also, there's so much that kids are subject to. This is Carl Joseph Walker. He committed suicide, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, and he was 11 years old. Carl, in my mind, and he certainly was, it's not true, it's not factual, but in my mind, his suicide marks the beginning of this epidemic of teen suicides, or kids who committed suicide because of anti-gay bullying and harassment. And Carl, the reason why, I mean, he's just cute. Look, he's 11 years old. He's in his little football uniform, and he was taunted unmercifully every single day at his school. And Carl's mother went to the school, talked to the principal, told everybody, what was going on. And she loved Carl, and Carl was 11 years old. He didn't know if he was gay or what. They didn't even discuss it. That was just not the point. He was 11 years old. He was called gay because he hung out with his mother, and he was in church, and this and that. And he just couldn't take it, even though he came from a loving home, loving and supportive home. One day he came home and hung himself, and his little sister found him. And as I say, in my mind, that began this whole epidemic of teen suicides. So these quick news clips represent stories around the country, and they're all boys who ended up committing suicide because they could no longer take the anti-gay bullying at their schools. And I would say it's safe to say that at least half of these kids, at least because I'm kind of intimately familiar with their stories, came from supportive homes. So it wasn't their families. It was school. And kids, you know this, the kids spend so much time at school, and they were desperate enough, and they believed that their situation was not going to change at school, and they couldn't take it anymore, and committed suicide. So we released a video Because in addition to the magazines and the website and the lessons that we offer on diversity and inclusion, we also have a number of documentary films. So our most recent film is called Bullied. A student, a school, and a case that changed history. But not really, changed history, not really. It set a precedent where the courts ruled for the first time that schools had an obligation to protect students based on sexual orientation. Prior to that, it was only established around kind of race and some other factors. But this, in the late 80s, ruled that schools have an obligation to protect based on sexual orientation. So this is a story of Jamie Nabuzny, a kid that went to school in Wisconsin and was bullied and harassed throughout junior high and high school. He attempted suicide, he was not successful. He dropped out of school twice and he ran away from home. After he turned 18, he decided to sue his school district, and he won a $900,000 judgment against the school district. In schools at that time, they were supposed to change because they knew that they were supposed to protect every student, but that's not the case. So with the Bullied Kit, we hope to sensitize teachers and administrators to their plight. Let's go back to the hate thing for a minute. This image represents an increase in the number of anti-American groups, patriot groups, militia groups. Because in addition to, and this number is separate from the number of active hate groups. This is a particular type of group. This is a particular anti-government group. And look at this graph. You can see that shot up directly, that increase is directly tied to the Obama presidency. The number of anti-American, anti-government militia groups increased with the election of Barack Obama. We haven't seen this kind of increase in the number of militia groups since right before the Oklahoma bombing. And remember, I said we've been tracking these things for a long time. And before the Oklahoma bombing, we saw these signs that something was up, and we tried to tell, then Attorney General Janet Reno, nobody would listen, and Oklahoma bombing happened. Now we see stuff like a couple years ago, you probably hear about this, a guy ran an airplane into an